Look around the planet right now. In Norway, someone is walking to work with skin so pale, it looks almost translucent under the winter light. In Nigeria, someone is walking to work with skin so deeply pigmented, it seems to drink in the sun. In the Philippines, in Peru, in Egypt, in Japan, in 1,000 cities in between. Human skin is painted in an almost endless range of shades. And for centuries, people looked at that range and built entire systems on top of it. Systems of division, systems of hierarchy, systems of cruelty. But here is the part almost nobody is taught in school. Skin color was never about race. It was never about superiority. It was never even really about appearance at all. It was about survival. It was about a molecule fighting a war against the sun, and about a body trying to solve one of the strangest chemistry problems evolution ever handed it. Today, we are going to pull that story apart, piece by piece. And by the end of it, you will never look in a mirror the same way again. Rewind the clock. Not by hundreds of years, not by thousands. Rewind it by millions. Somewhere between 5 and 7 million years ago, our earliest ancestors looked nothing like us. They were smaller, more ape-like, and almost certainly covered head to toe in thick body hair, just like modern chimpanzees. And underneath that hair, most researchers believe their skin was actually pale. Pale skin hidden beneath a coat of fur didn't need much protection, because the fur itself was doing the job. But then something happened that changed everything. Our ancestors started walking upright, moving across open grasslands under the brutal East African sun, chasing prey across long distances in the heat of the day. And a body covered in thick fur is a body that overheats fast. So evolution did something dramatic. It stripped away most of that fur and replaced it with something new. Millions of sweat glands, capable of cooling the body far more efficiently than any other primate on Earth. It was a brilliant adaptation for endurance. But it created an entirely new problem. Bare skin, under equatorial sunlight, all day, every day, for a lifetime. Here's where the story gets genuinely surprising. Most people assume the big danger of strong sunlight is skin cancer. And yes, ultraviolet radiation can cause that. But evolution mostly doesn't care about diseases that show up after your reproductive years are already over. Evolution cares about one narrow, brutal question. Did you survive long enough to have children who also survive? So the real driver behind darker skin wasn't cancer at all. It was something far less talked about. Folate. Folate, also known as vitamin B9, is essential for cell division, for DNA repair, and critically, for healthy fetal development. And ultraviolet radiation destroys folate in the bloodstream extremely efficiently. In a population without much skin protection, low folate levels lead to serious birth defects, especially neural tube defects, and can even affect fertility. In other words, under a blazing equatorial sun, unprotected skin wasn't just uncomfortable. It was quietly sabotaging the next generation before it was even born. This is where melanin enters the story. Melanin is a natural pigment produced by cells called melanocytes, and it acts as a built-in biological sunscreen. It absorbs and scatters ultraviolet radiation before it can penetrate deep into the skin and break down folate. Individuals who happen to produce more melanin protected their folate levels more effectively. Their children were healthier. Their children survived more often. And over hundreds of thousands of years in Africa, under some of the strongest sunlight found anywhere on the planet, that single advantage compounded again and again until dark, richly pigmented skin became the default setting for our species, not because it looked a certain way, Because it worked. For an enormous stretch of human history, this was simply the story. Everyone was human, and almost everyone lived in Africa, under strong sun, with well-protected, dark skin. Then, somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 years ago, small groups of humans began to leave. They crossed into the Middle East. They pushed north into what would become Europe. They moved east across Asia. Eventually, their descendants would cross into Australia, into Siberia, and eventually into the Americas, all without a single map, compass, or GPS signal. Just curiosity, necessity, and an extraordinary amount of walking. And as they moved farther from the equator, the environment around them quietly transformed. The sunlight grew weaker. The angle of the sun's rays became shallower. In northern latitudes, especially during long winters, ultraviolet radiation dropped dramatically compared to equatorial Africa. On the surface, that sounds like good news. Less intense sun means less risk to folate, right? Except now a second problem crept in, one just as dangerous as the first, but working in the exact opposite direction. The same ultraviolet radiation that destroys folate is also required to produce vitamin D in the skin. Vitamin D is essential for absorbing calcium, for building strong bones, and for keeping the immune system functioning properly. Without enough of it, children develop rickets, a condition that softens and weakens bones, sometimes permanently. Adults face increased risk of fractures, weakened immunity, and complications during pregnancy. So in low sunlight environments, dark skin, once a life-saving shield, became a liability. It was so effective at blocking UV radiation that it also blocked the body's ability to manufacture enough vitamin D. Populations that migrated into northern Europe and northern Asia were suddenly caught in a genuine biological trap. Too much melanin and vitamin D production collapsed. Too little melanin and folate would have been destroyed back in Africa. The solution evolution reached for was elegant in hindsight. In regions with weaker sunlight, natural selection gradually favored individuals whose skin produced less melanin, allowing enough UV radiation through to keep vitamin D levels healthy, while still living far enough from the equator that folate destruction was less of a threat. This didn't happen in a single generation. It unfolded across thousands of years. Gene frequency, shifting slowly, generation after generation, until entire populations had adapted to their new environments. Before we go further into how this actually played out across different continents, and, trust me, the answer is far stranger than dark in the south, light in the north. Let's pause for a second. If your mind is already being blown by how much biology is hiding behind something as simple as skin tone, this is exactly the kind of deep dive we live for here. Hit that subscribe button and join the half-evolved tribe. We're not just here to tell you facts. We're here to help you understand the hidden forces that built the human body, piece by piece, over millions of years. And while you're at it, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from right now. Let's see just how far this story of human diversity actually reaches. Stay curious. Stay evolved. Now, let's get back into it. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone, including people who consider themselves fairly well-read on human history. The pale skin we associate with modern Europeans today is not ancient. It is, on an evolutionary timescale, shockingly recent. Ancient DNA extracted from skeletons found across Europe has completely upended the old assumptions. Some of the hunter-gatherers who lived in Europe thousands of years after the initial migration out of Africa still carried genes associated with dark or olive skin. In one especially famous case, a roughly 10,000-year-old skeleton from England, nicknamed Cheddar Man, was found to carry genetic markers strongly associated with dark skin, paired, strangely enough, with blue eyes. For years, popular imagination assumed dark skin and blue eyes couldn't coexist. Evolution clearly disagreed. So when did widespread pale skin actually take hold across Europe? Largely later, as farming spread across the continent. Early hunter-gatherer diets were often rich in vitamin D from fish, organ meat, and other wild foods, which reduced the pressure to lighten skin. But as populations shifted toward farming and grain-based diets, natural dietary sources of vitamin D became scarcer. Suddenly, absorbing enough UV radiation through the skin mattered even more. Genetic variants associated with lighter skin spread rapidly through these farming populations, not because they were superior, but because, under those specific dietary and environmental conditions, they simply worked better. Now, here's where the story becomes genuinely fascinating from a scientific standpoint. East Asian populations also evolved lighter skin compared to their African ancestors, facing many of the same reduced sunlight pressures found in Northern Europe. But when researchers compared the actual genes responsible, they found something remarkable. Many of the genetic variants involved were different from the ones found in Europeans. Two populations, on opposite sides of the planet, arrived at broadly similar outcomes. Lighter skin adapted to lower UV environments through largely independent genetic pathways. This is a phenomenon scientists call convergent evolution. When separate populations evolve similar traits independently because they're responding to similar environmental pressures, not because they share a single recent common solution. It's a powerful reminder that evolution isn't following one master blueprint. It's more like millions of small, local experiments running simultaneously across the globe, each one shaped by its own unique mix of sunlight, diet, geography, and time. If the sunlight explanation were the entire story, you'd expect a perfectly clean gradient. Darkest skin at the equator, lightest skin at the poles, no exceptions. Reality, as always, is messier and more interesting. Take the Inuit populations of the Arctic. Despite living at extremely high latitudes, with very weak sunlight for much of the year, Inuit populations have noticeably darker skin than many other groups at similar latitudes. Why? Diet. Traditional Inuit diets are extraordinarily rich in vitamin D, thanks to a heavy reliance on fatty fish, seal, and whale blubber. Because their food was already supplying abundant vitamin D, there was far less evolutionary pressure to lighten their skin to absorb more UV radiation. At the same time, retaining more melanin offered protection against the intense glare of ultraviolet light reflecting off snow and ice. Similar patterns show up elsewhere. Coastal populations with fish-heavy diets, high-altitude populations exposed to intense UV despite cooler climates, and populations who have relocated relatively recently in evolutionary terms, all reveal that skin color was never shaped by sunlight alone. Diet, altitude, migration history, and time all played their own roles, weaving together into the incredibly complex, continuous spectrum of human skin tones we see today. A spectrum with no clean boundaries, no natural categories, just an unbroken gradient shaped by thousands of years of local adaptation. Which brings us to a strange twist in the story. The world humans built moves far faster than evolution ever could. Today, a person with deeply pigmented, equatorial adapted skin might be living in cloudy London, at constant risk of vitamin D deficiency. Meanwhile, a person with pale, northern adapted skin might be living under the harsh sun of Australia or the American Southwest, at significantly elevated risk of UV damage and skin cancer. Global migration has scattered ancient adaptations into environments they were never originally shaped for, all within the span of a few generations, a blink of an eye, compared to the tens of thousands of years it took these traits to evolve in the first place. This is why doctors in low sunlight regions increasingly recommend vitamin D supplementation for people with darker skin tones, and why dermatologists in high UV regions stress the importance of sunscreen for people with lighter skin. It isn't about fixing something broken. It's about consciously supporting a body whose ancient adaptations simply haven't caught up with its modern zip code. Step back far enough and something remarkable comes into focus. Every single human being alive today, regardless of skin tone, traces their ancestry back to the same African populations that existed roughly 200,000 years ago. The lightest skin and the darkest skin on Earth are separated by nothing more than a few genes, shaped over a relatively short evolutionary window by sunlight, diet, and geography. We are not separate races with separate origins. We are one species, wearing thousands of slightly different shades of the exact same evolutionary solution, each one calibrated generationally stop after generation to a different patch of sunlight on a single shared planet. So, the next time you see someone whose skin looks nothing like yours, understand what you're actually looking at, not a different race, not a different category, a different chapter of the same survival story written by ancestors who never met each other, never knew each other existed, and yet somehow, independently, solved the exact same problem in their own unique way. That's not a story of division. That's one of the most extraordinary examples of adaptation in the entire natural world, and it's written directly into your own skin. If this journey into human evolution changed the way you see the world, even a little, make sure you're subscribed to Half Evolved, because we've barely scratched the surface of what your body has been quietly telling you all along. Drop a comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and until next time, stay curious, stay evolved.